This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. August 23rd, 1921. R-38 is a rigid airship. That is an introduction to a story that involves a much larger airship 9 years later. That ship is His Majesty's airship, and the author, S.C. Gwynne, tells us this is the life and tragic death of the world's largest flying machine. I welcome Sam Gwynne. Sam, a very good evening to you. Thank you for this. We go to August 23rd, 1921, because this was a voyage to demonstrate the authority and the success of a rigid airship to the British population, flying over the city of Hull and then over the Humber River, eventually 12 days later. What we're looking at here is a rigid airship that people have a vague understanding of because of the Hindenburg tragedy. What at the time was the ambition of those flying that ship? How did the United Kingdom, how did the British Empire regard rigid airships now, 2 years after the Versailles Treaty? Good evening to you, Sam.
Good evening. Yes, this was a major event in the post-war years in Great Britain. R-38 was meant to be kind of a world beater. These rigid airships, and when we think of rigid airships, it's not a blimp, it's not a balloon, it is a steel, think of a steel structure in which there are these huge gas bags that allow a blimp doesn't have any steel structure around it, and of course a balloon doesn't either. So these things were, if you think of the Hindenburg, that was one, so that will frame it for people. But this, in the immediate post-war years, this was Great Britain's attempt to kind of beat the world in this technology that had been around for about 20 years, invented by the Germans. And what they were going to do was fly this absolutely enormous. These things were bigger than anything that anybody had ever seen before. They were on the level of a large ocean liner, and yet they were lighter than the air in which they floated. They were rather remarkable things. And R-38 was actually just a complete disaster from its very conception. The British did everything wrong. The British, mind you, now coming out of World War I, have the largest empire on earth, but they just got superseded by pretty much, by the US is now economically superior to Britain. Britain is no longer the ruler of the waves that it once was. They're looking for a technological advantage. So this was what it was. They failed to test this craft. They tested it incorrectly when they did test it. They didn't build it nearly strong enough so that when it was doing turning, it was up in the air. People were watching it. This is in the city of Hull over the River Humber doing these turning operations much too fast for the altitude that it was at, which would have been revealed in the tests that they had done if anybody had really paid attention. And so lo and behold, the thing basically breaks in half and falls into the river in this absolutely horrific disaster that disproves all of these claims that Britain is just going to be this world beater of this new technology.
There's an explosion, the hydrogen. They were using hydrogen.
They were using hydrogen.
Not helium. Why, Sam?
First of all, there was, at this point in history, there was hardly any helium anywhere to be used. Such as existed was in the Texas Panhandle near the city of Amarillo. The U.S. had and has pretty much all the helium. But in these days, it wasn't seen as being strategic yet, and so there really wasn't very much of it. As time goes by, this becomes a very different question, and helium becomes available. But at this point, the lifting gas, as we call it, the thing that's going to lift the airship, is pretty much going to be hydrogen. That was your choice. There wasn't another one at that point. Hydrogen, of course, is gigantically explosive, as was witnessed in the crash of R-38, and then later other airships, and the world saw what it looked like. The thing that helps about the Hindenburg, I think, which is 1937, now 16 years after this, is you can see what a giant airship filled with hydrogen looks like when it goes up in flames. And there were lots of those, and we'll get into this, but at least 75 by my count. Everybody says, well, everybody saw one, but there were many, many more, including this one.
There is a man who was a wing commander in the First War, Charles Dennistoun Burney. There's
Bernie.
the Burney Plan comes forward even after the R-38 crash. Who is Burney and what is his plan?
So Bernie had this idea. It was a global airship scheme, and what Great Britain was going to do was we're going to populate the world of their empire with airships. And what they were going to do, this is now you have to go back and remember back here in the 1920s. There was actually a competition between airships and airplanes for not so much short range travel, but long range travel. Um, there was absolute, and no one had won yet. Airplanes were, even though they were gaining in popularity, they were extremely dangerous. They had to be refueled all the time. And for long range travel, it seemed to many people that Zeppelins or large rigid airships were the way to go. Um, and so Bernie was the first one to come up with a kind of an idea for a global airship scheme. Now, keep in mind at this point, Great Britain comes out of World War I with the largest empire the world has ever known. It is 25% of the planet. It is now incorporated, German holdings in Asia and sort of the Ottoman Empire. All these things are folded into this empire, and um, so that the time and the distance between, say, Sydney, Australia, one of the dominions, to England, or Singapore to England, or South Africa to England, or whatever, pick your British colony. We're talking weeks here, India in particular. Instead of 2 weeks, it would be 4 days that you could do this in an airship. And so what Bernie wanted to do was redefine the technological empire essentially through the air. We're going to link everything together, and everything was going to be much closer in time. And it was going to be these airships that were going to do it, because airships were seen to be superior at this point. We're 6 years before Lindbergh here, seen to be superior to airplanes.
The politics of this are critical because this is a moment in the history of the empire when the conservatives, the Tories, will step aside for the Labour Party. Ramsay MacDonald takes office in January of 24. Ramsay MacDonald has a friend whom he puts forward as part of a committee to review the concept of the Burney Plan, the Imperial airships. His name is Christopher Birdwood Thomson, called Kit. Ramsay MacDonald and Kit are friends at this point. How did that happen, Sam?
The meeting between Ramsay MacDonald, the first socialist Prime Minister of England, and Christopher Birdwood Thomson, who would become his Secretary of State for Air, was a sort of a fortuitous kind of alignment of minds between people with very, very different backgrounds. Thomson, who was a lifer in the army, would normally never have even been in range of an appointment like this, except for this kind of peculiar friendship with Ramsay MacDonald. And indeed, Thomson himself doesn't add up to a socialist anything, even though he becomes part of MacDonald's cabinet.
We need to fill that out, Sam.
Yeah, I know.
Speaking to S.C. Gwynne, His Majesty's Airship is the book, The Life and Tragic Death of the World's Largest Flying Machine. Kit Thomson is a man who's born in India near Bombay in 1875. His father's a major general. He's related to a man who will become the head of the army in India. His mother's family is extremely well known everywhere. He becomes a member of the Royal Army and Royal Engineers, goes out to India. He fights with everybody. As far as I can see, this is Zelig of the British Army. He fights he fights in the Boer War. He fights at Jerusalem in the Second War with Allenby. He's in the British Expeditionary Force with Haig. And then he's assigned 1915 to Romania. And therein lies the tale. Who does he meet in Romania, Sam, who comes to dominate his life?
All right, Christopher Birdwood Thomson is, as you said, a man of empire. I mean, he was raised multi-generational in the Raj. His family on both sides extremely influential. He He is in all those places indeed, and in World War II, this is yet another military posting as part of the British Empire. He's sent to Bucharest in Romania, which seems sort of like the middle of nowhere, except it was actually near a very critical front. And while he's there, he meets a woman that to him is a fairy tale princess, and she is kind of a fairy tale princess. If you see photographs of her, she's absolutely flat gorgeous. I mean, she was considered one of the best looking women in Europe. She's fluent in 4 or 5 languages. She is Romanian, yes, but spends much of her time in Paris. She is a princess, having married the prince. She is unimaginably wealthy. She is also, and this is interesting. So here we have a, young, gorgeous woman who is also, in addition to all those things, she is the toast of literary Paris. She has written a couple of books um, uh, that have just become big bestsellers. Marcel Proust is writing her poetry. André Gide is a friend. I mean, this is the crowd she's running with. So Thomson, who, in spite of the fact that he's a military guy, he's very intellectual. He's a reader. He's a good writer, an accomplished writer. He meets this woman. I mean, she's got 2 palaces. He's single. He's 40-ish. Just falls head over heels in love. This is wartime Romania, and it's interesting because for later reference, he nearly gets killed by a bomb delivered from a German Zeppelin. But this relationship, so the book in my book, Thomson is the hero, if you will. He's the main character. He's the main driver behind this giant airship scheme as it happens, and she it becomes his obsession, a lifelong obsession, as it turns out, who influences a great deal of what happens in the book.
Yes, he must be as important as all the other men in her life. And he's a lowly former military man, now member of the Labor Party, which has no significance whatsoever. He's a politician. And Marta Babesco runs with kings and princes and generals, including Germans and French, and she's a vision. And so Kit, now Minister of Air for the Ramsay MacDonald government, the first government, 9 months, sees the Burney Plan. And the Burney Plan becomes something that is important to Kit. How is it that he decides that this is his way forward in order to become Lord Thomson of Carrington? How does he decide?
So Thomson, as you said, ascends to the cabinet position of Secretary of State for Air, which is such a wonderful, it's got such a nice Shakespearean ring to it, doesn't it? Secretary of State for Air. And as such, he's over all of air, meaning airplanes and balloons and blimps and airships uh, and everything else. He didn't originally think up this idea, which would become the Imperial Airship scheme, but he got on board with it. He bought into this idea that the world was going to be populated by, or the skies were going to be filled with British airships using British technology, linking their gigantic empire together and changing the world. And this is back in 1924. And he gets behind, again, the Imperial Airship scheme, which is what's going to drive this entire book, and in fact, down to the tragic end 6 years later. It's just there are different reasons you could say why he wanted to do this, but we have to bring India into it at some point. He is from India. His family were the cornerstone of the Raj. India is the 300 plus million people. It's the jewel in the British Empire. And an airship could make this trip very, very quickly in a couple of days, as opposed to 10 or 11 days by sea. He sees this changing the world. He's also, as we'll see, linked to India in other ways as well. And there's a final thing that he wants to do, and this links back to Marta Babesco, is sort of everything he's done coming out as a kind of a lowly well, he was a brigadier, but I mean, he wasn't any great shakes compared to Churchill and everybody else that Vesco was hanging out with. But he wants to impress her. There's a lot of that here. He wants to impress the girl. He certainly does that becoming by joining the British cabinet, but he wants to do it also by changing the world of the air with this scheme.
Ramsay MacDonald will go out of power in 9 months, but the Burney Plan survives. And Thomson's out of power too. He loses his post with MacDonald being replaced by Baldwin. Thomson spends his time, though, Royal Aeronautical Society, the Royal Aero Club, the Air League. He's very busy identifying, though he's never flown an aircraft, to my knowledge. He's promoting, and you make it clear in those 5 years between governments that Thomson is a driver for the great success that will come 20 years later, the RAF. Even though he was trained as a Royal Engineer, he was inspirational. And I think, Sam, you make the case that he speaks well. Is that correct? We've got about a minute.
Yes, he does. He speaks well. He speaks many languages. He spoke French better than anybody in the British Army, which was used in Versailles after World War One. He's a talented man, very tall, tallest man of the British Army, very tallest officer, very impressive person if you had met him.
And when he's in the House of Lords, he's convincing. He stands up and holds his own, though he's not wealthy, though he's not coming from a long line of landed nobility. He's an impressive man who is pretty much on his own, Sam. It's entirely admirable. He's by his bootstraps. He has a family that he loves and a brother, a very good brother to him, but he doesn't have what I would say would be the advantage of empire at this point. He's making it up as he goes along. And one of the things he makes up is the Burney Plan. So when we come back, what does that mean, the Burney Plan for R101? The book is His Majesty's Airship. Sam Gwynne, S.C. Gwynne is the author. The Life and Tragic Death of the World's Largest Flying Machine. We've shown you the disaster of R-38. There are many other disasters all around the world with these rigid airships flying with hydrogen, highly flammable hydrogen, more than 1,300 degrees when it burns suddenly and brings these ships down and destroys the crew. But our Minister of Air, Kit Thomson, has a vision. He's also Lord Cardington. He's going to build 2 ships. One is going to be R100, and R100 is going to represent socialism, built by the state. R101 is going to be built by capitalism, or at least they regard it as capitalism. And they're going to be built in different places. R100 is standard issue material from the German success of rigid airships. R101, however, the Imperial Majesty's ship, is going to have lots of experiments on it. Sam, why did they choose to put all these new features on R101? Should we regard this as a beta? That's our language today. Is that how to view R101?
R101 was going to be an entirely new thing. As we said before, Zeppelins were invented, the rigid airships rather, were invented by Ferdinand von Zeppelin in 1900, used extensively in World War I, which was also a great theater to illustrate their problems, which is that they all went down in flames, most of them. But R101, so as you said, there's the capitalist airship and the socialist airship. The socialist airship was, here, we're going to give you X amount of money, do it for that money. R101 was what we'd call cost plus. It was like Vickers, it was whatever you wanted. And they just loaded it with technology. And it was meant to be a flagship of empire. It was meant to demonstrate, if you look back on the British Empire, it's kind of built on the pounding greased piston of British technology, better engines, better guns, better ships, better everything technologically better. The British wanted to do this again, and R101 was going to be that. And so we have things, for example, diesel engines were very heavy. And so they took diesel locomotives and put them up into R101, locomotive engines. Now, it sounds crazy that you would take something really heavy and put it up into a lighter than air ship, but the point was, and this gets back to hydrogen, that the fumes would be less flammable. I mean, even a spark on a hydrogen-filled airship goes boom. So they're lifting all of these, massive tornado diesel engines up into never been done before. These enormous parachute harnesses around these 5.5 million cubic feet of gas bags, never been done before. Just I could just keep going with the number of the material science and everything else that they did, pumping systems to pump ballast through the ship. It goes on and on and on. But it was meant to be this not only an airship that could fly to Sydney and back and India and back, but also just a technological masterpiece, a showcase for this new British Empire. We're in the 1920s now, that was going to change the world.
5.5 years later, they're still building. Things have happened. General strike, world depression, wars, and changing of the guard. However, 5.5 years later, Ramsay MacDonald and Labour comes back into power. And of course, our hero, Kit Thomson, back at Air Minister. Carrington, he's Lord of Carrington, Thomson of Carrington, and that's where they're building R101. And there are parts of R101, as Sam just evidenced, that are new to do with engines. But the one that I was most attracted to was how they build the airbags, these enormous airbags filled with gas that have to be ultra light. What is the material they choose, and what is the material they reject, Sam?
So they tried their. So when von Zeppelin invented the Zeppelins, which were giant rigid airships, right? He used big gas bags that were made out of cattle intestines. And why cattle intestines? Because hydrogen is a very, very light element. It's the lightest element, and it tends to get out from wherever you put it. And even though they tried to figure out, and they tried dozens and dozens, the Germans first and then the British later, dozens of materials that might hold hydrogen, the best they could come up with was cattle intestines, particularly the cecum, a part of the intestine. And for you and me, we would think about sausage casings. Just think about the sausages you had for breakfast the other day. That's what it is, which is astonishingly fragile. Where do you get them from? Well, where do you get enough of them, let's say, to build many gas bags, each of which is 10 stories high? Well, you have to kill 500,000 cattle in Argentina, which is where they came from. They literally, you take the cecum, the piece of the intestine, and it comes out of kind of a square about the size of a handkerchief, and then you glue it to other ones, and then you glue some very thin cotton batting on the back of it. And then you build your, 140-foot high gas bag out of it. So these are enormously fragile, and they're containing one of the most explosive substances on Earth. And it was very retro in a way, and nobody actually figured it out until Goodyear did later in the 30s. They finally figured out some kind of a rubberized backing that would do this. But until then, this was part of the bargain of the airship. They were their most dangerous pieces were their most fragile.
Yes, I have power. This is Sam's reporting. Power rudder and elevators, pre-doped outer cover, ventilation, bow and tail, a backup control room, a deep V ring, a parachute ring to hold everything together, double parachute gas bags, tail fins. I could go on. It also had a
It goes
room,
on.
dining room, and an observation room because it was for passengers. It was
Yeah.
to leave London and arrive.
Smoking room, smoking lounge.
Yes, asbestos lined. It was top of the line. It was meant for the empire to express everywhere. And they started the trials October of 1929. The one I loved was where they flew over. Is this where they flew over Sandringham and the king and queen waved at them?
Yes, and they bowed. The airship bowed, and the king saluted back or whatever. Yes, yes.
All this,
Maybe that was Henley, but anyway, but yes, it was they were trying this airship out, and because they hadn't tested it very well, it had all these great problems, and it kept plunging and diving.
we need to introduce one character as important for this moment of the R101. Who is Scotty?
Scotty, George Herbert Scott, one of the great lost and forgotten heroes of the aviation industry business. Scotty was he made his name as the pilot, the captain of a ship called R-34, which in 1919 made the first east to west crossing of the Atlantic which was the hard way. Lindbergh went the easy way. And Lindbergh didn't do his thing until 8 years later. First east to west crossing, first double crossing of the Atlantic. And he did it in this old German Zeppelin that had no business doing that. Flew it across the Atlantic and back. Scotty was he came back to, to a hero's acclaim, a well-deserved. The horror stories of that trip, which I tell, I mean, it should never have made it. Remarkable stuff.
Push
Scott
on
was
Scotty. Push on Scotty. That's why did they call him Push on Scotty when they got to Canada?
Well, he would push on regardless. It was press on regardless.
There's storms all
Press on
around.
regardless, which is like, no matter what. It was kind of an RAF, the unofficial RAF motto, which is that in spite of obstacles that would turn a lesser person back, push on, push on, push on. And that's what he did. And he had when we get to R101 in his flight, he had the call. He was technically in charge of the British airship flying program.
Yes, and in the 10, 11 years between 1919, his triumph, Push on Scotty, and the R101 flights, he has fallen into a regular habit of drinking too much.
Yeah,
And
he becomes a person who is well drunk at lunchtime, and everybody knows he's kind of useless after that. And his mother was an alcoholic. There's a tradition in his family, but so by the time we get to the launch of R101 in 1930, he is well into a full blown, as his one of his colleagues said, dipsomania.
Kit wants to fly now, 1929. All right, the trials are over. We do it in fair weather. We don't take off into storms. We want to go now. Why? Why is Kit so keen? He's Minister of Air, but they're still experimenting at Carrington. It has to do with India. What does Ramsay MacDonald offer him? What does he tell Marta, Scott?
So ultimately, the reason that R101 leaves for India on that fateful night of October 4th, 1930, there are a number of reasons. One, it's the fulfillment of the Imperial Airship scheme, which is way behind schedule, and Thomson has been working on since 1924. Right, it's been interrupted by other things, but he's been the point man really for 6 years. This thing hasn't flown. The press, Parliament, everybody are getting upset about this. The other reason he has to leave is because, unbeknownst to anyone, he has been offered the viceroyship of India. Now, this is just to put this into perspective. This is where you would rule over 350 million people, the largest piece of the British Empire, and you would rule over them. It was a dictatorship, basically, and that was so for him, he was going to become the next viceroy of India. So setting his global airship scheme into place, where India would be the Karachi to London, back and forth airships were part of this. Also, frankly, because of his love affair with Marta Bibesco, it brings his airships. Let's assume he's in India, sitting in his 200,000 square foot palace, the largest residence of any leader of the Western of the world.
340 rooms. Yes.
340 rooms. Yeah. So and the summer place was pretty nice too. The airship brings him closer to Martha. Martha at this point cannot marry him. That's not ever going to happen. It brings her closer to him. Now he's only a couple days from Europe, where she is, and so it's the Raj taking hold of the Raj. It's the girlfriend. It's the fulfillment of the Imperial Airship scheme. All these things are coming to play. But there's one more thing for that. When the launch, why does that launch have to take place October 4th, 1930? Why not, December 9th or something like that? Well, there's an imperial conference every few years the British would have, with all their territories and dominions and colonies. They would have, from Canada to Australia to South Africa to wherever. They would all come to London, and they would convene, and they would kind of determine the policy of empire. And what Thomson wanted to do was fly to Karachi on R101, turn around, fly back, land trailing clouds of glory, and step into the Imperial Conference, which was a specific day in October, and announced to the world that he had solved basically the problem of transport around the British Empire. So all of these were reasons why we had to leave, and we should never have left. The thing wasn't certified to fly. It left that night.
Yes, we're talking now about all the motives that delivered the decision to go on October 4th. Why October 4th? You ask yourself. The weather is going to be determinative. Sam Gwynne, S.C. Gwynne, is the author. His Majesty's Airship, The Life and Tragic Death of the World's Largest Flying Machine. R101 will go down in France. However, there are decisions made here that have defied analysis all these years since, except Sam has an analysis that makes sense, and it's as up-to-date as anything that existed in 1930 when they mourned the crash. Moments the day before the launch on October 4th, our hero, Lord Thomson Carrington, visits Ramsay MacDonald. And Ramsay MacDonald asks him not to go. Don't go now. You don't need to rush this. And he tells Ramsay MacDonald, our fates are written in the heavens. It's very poetic, Sam.
Yeah.
It's very tragic. Did he write Marta? Do we know?
Well, he did. He wrote a note to be delivered before he left, to be delivered at Christmas time. But which was kind of how the book ends, because he's 3 months dead at the moment that it gets delivered. But
he didn't write her of that line, "Our fates are written in the heaven." That's only for Ramsay MacDonald.
yeah, yes. I mean, he believed he was stepping on this just fantastic airship that was going to take him to India and back, and that the world was going to be great, and he was going to be on top of it, and he was going to be viceroy of India, and he would still have his girlfriend, and life was going to be good.
His brother asked him not to take everybody new on board. Why? His
brother was aware of all of the problems with this airship. I mean, this was an airship has a relatively strong steel frame, but it has an incredibly weak outer cover, which is really just very, very thin doped linen. And R101's was rotting. You could put your finger through a lot of it. It also has these gas bags, which we've said are just, they're animal intestines. They're tiny, they're very fragile things. So you have this outer cover of linen and cotton, which is extremely fragile and untested in weather, protecting these huge gas bags, which were getting holes in them and losing gas all the time, all through the testing trials. This is a story of incompetence, industrial incompetence here all the way along. So his brother just knew that this was being rushed along, that this was a risk. That Thomson was putting everybody in danger by doing what he did.
One more detail: they can't go high; they have to stay under 1,500 feet. Why?
Because every couple hundred feet of altitude means you lose lift, and losing lift means it's just the way it goes. You can't, in other words, if you want to fly at 10,000 feet, you have to take out all the weight in the airship, basically, which is what the Germans did with their Zeppelins in World War I to bomb London. They took out all the weight so they could go to 15, 20,000 feet. But if you're going to carry anything at all, you've got to stay low. So by definition, they had to fly low. And 1,500 feet for a 777-foot long airship. So think that the height above ground that R101 was twice its length. Think of that in terms of a 747, for example. You wouldn't think you were very safe at that height above the earth. So this was baked into the concept of the rigid airship. And so if something goes wrong, let's say at 1,500 feet, which it did, enormous loss of gas because of all these problems that had happened before. You didn't have there was no way that you can save yourself. You didn't have room to save yourself.
As they approach the English Channel, Scotty's on site, overcalling the captain, Bert Irwin. There's disturbed weather ahead, and Scotty makes the call. Is his word final? Nobody challenges him?
He is given the go, no-go call. This This alcoholic and presumably at that point drunk. He was slurring his words as the ship went off. He was given the call. He should not have been given the call. So he press on Scotty, as we say, wants to press on regardless into the teeth of a storm, which they do. And as they cross the English Channel toward France, it gets more intense. And it was yet another mistake of many, many, many mistakes that led to the crash of the airship. He should never have said they could go, but of course, Thomson has to get to Karachi, by whatever the date is, by early October in order to make the Imperial Conference when he comes back.
The tragedy is vivid, and Sam makes it very carefully analytical, then and now. I want to underline, however, the reading of the tragedy. You want to reach out and stop them. You want to say to them, don't you pay attention to anyone. Turn back now, because they can't land where they are. They'd have to go back to a tower. Did it make you, we have 30 seconds, Sam. Did it make you feel that way when you were finishing the book? You could tell them to stop?
It was such a tragedy. Yeah, you couldn't. It was kind of the horse was out of the barn. There was no stopping it. It was headed for its doom, in a way that the Titanic wasn't. I mean, we didn't know that that was going to go down. I mean, you could have said that this was very likely going to go down.
The book is His Majesty's Airship, The Life and Tragic Death of the World's Largest Flying Machine. S.C. Gwynne, Sam Gwynne is the author. I'm John Batchelor.